Before we start, let me ask you a simple question, but one you might never have really stopped to answer. What happened between you and your father? Take a deep breath. I'll wait. Because this question isn't light. It's heavy. Heavy with silences, with blurry memories, with longings that maybe don't even have a name. Some people will remember a smell, a hug, a laugh. Some will remember a disappearance, a door slamming, an empty Sunday, and some won't remember anything. Because the father was never really present. Everyone carries their own story with their father, and most of those stories are more complex than they seem. There's love mixed with anger. There's absence disguised as independence. There are fathers who were there but never really were. And there are children who grew up trying to be strong, trying to handle it, trying not to feel. But they do feel. We always feel. That's why I invite you to pause for a few seconds and do something I know takes courage. Share your story in the comments. How was it for you? What does this word, father, stir inside you? Is it affection? Is it pain? Is it longing? Is it emptiness? Say whatever you can, however you can, because sometimes speaking is the first step to not carrying everything alone, and your voice might be exactly what someone else needed to hear to understand their own pain. And since we're going to dive together into something so deep, subscribe here now, not to collect videos, but to continue this conversation that, honestly, goes far beyond the screen. Because what comes next isn't just about Freud, nor just about fathers. It's about you, about the child who once needed someone, and maybe didn't find them, and about the adult who now can do something about it. So breathe, look inside, and come with me. Now, yes, let's begin. There is a type of wound that doesn't bleed, an absence without a name, but that shapes the body, character, and soul, and digs deep, silently, like someone building a tomb inside childhood. Growing up without a father is often not fully growing up. It's being thrown into the world without a compass, without ground, without a mirror to recognize yourself. It's living with the feeling that something is missing, and not knowing if that missing piece is the other, or yourself. Freud saw this with brutal clarity. The father, in his theory, is not just someone. He is a psychic function. He is what introduces the subject to limits, renunciation, and regulated desire. Without this structure, the subject dissolves. They remain stuck in raw pleasure without containment. A child without a father is like a river without banks. It overflows, floods, and drags everything along. The mother, no matter how present or loving, is not enough. Because the father's role is not just to give affection, it is above all to cut. Yes, to cut the symbiotic bond with the mother, to open space for the world, for law, for difference. And when this cut doesn't come, the child becomes hostage to their own desire. They get lost trying to find what was never given. They search in partners, addictions, careers, religions, anything that simulates the presence of the one who was missing. But no substitute fills the original hole. And that is where the cruelest suffering lies. The child doesn't cry just out of longing for the father. They cry because they never knew where they began, or if they even exist. Psychoanalysis does not spare us. It shows that this pain is not fussiness, not drama. It is the psychic consequence of a structural absence. And the most tragic part is that many fathers never realize the damage they caused, not out of malice but out of ignorance, cowardice, or because they themselves were children of absent fathers. And so the cycle turns. Entire generations raising lost children because they never had anyone to teach them how to be. In the end, what Freud gives us is not comfort. It is the chance to understand the origin of our abyss. Because if the father was not there or was there as a ghost, it is up to the child, with fire in their eyes and a scream in their soul, to find a new path. And maybe that path is to become the father they never had. Not for others, but for themselves. Freud did not talk about the father as one talks about a relative. He spoke as one speaks of an invisible pillar that supports the entire building of the psyche. When he referred to the father, it was not about the person listed on the birth certificate or the one who brought home the paycheck. The Freudian father is the bearer of the law. He is the one who arrives, symbolically or literally, to break the symbiosis between the mother and the child. And this break, as harsh as it may seem, is what allows subjectivity. Because without this cut, the child remains fused to the mother, trapped in the original pleasure, in the absolute warmth of a love that is total and suffocating. The paternal function, then, is not to embrace. It is to separate. It is to draw the line between the I and the other. It is to put boundaries on desire. Without it, the subject gets lost and spends life trying to separate, never having learned how. And here begins the tragedy of lost children. They want to get out of the maze but don't know the way because the father never showed the path. When the father does not fulfill this symbolic function, desire becomes unregulated. Everything turns into excess or lack. The child growing up doesn't understand their own limits, nor those of others. They love too much or don't love at all. They give themselves with hunger or close off like a stone. Because they never learn to modulate the distance between themselves and the world. Freud knew, desire is shaped by interdictions. The father who arrives with his symbolic authority is not there to oppress, but to allow desire to organize. He is the one who says, this is allowed, this is not. And by saying this, paradoxically, he gives the child the right to desire. Without this law, desire becomes raw, pulsional, formless. The subject becomes a slave to their own search and often seeks what destroys them. Sex without bonds, excessive ambitions, chaotic relationships. Deep down, it is all an attempt to reorganize something the father should have structured. But what was lost in the beginning is hard to rebuild later. That is why many fatherless children live as if trying to put together a puzzle without the picture on the box. They try to find out who they are, never having been authorized to be. And don't be mistaken, the father doesn't have to be dead or distant to be absent. There are many fathers physically present, but symbolically absent. They are at the dinner table, but don't listen. They are in the next room, but don't teach. They are alive, but do not fulfill the function psychoanalysis demands of them. And the result is the same. The child grows up without law, and a child without law becomes an orphan of themselves. They live in excess, impulse, and disorientation. They seek gurus, idols, leaders, any figure who offers some semblance of authority. Because the symbolic father is, at heart, the one who says, there is something greater than you. And when that is not said, the subject becomes a hostage to their own will. The self becomes a tyrant of itself, and the world, a battlefield where everything is a fight, need, war. That is why the absence of the father is so devastating. It doesn't just hurt, it destructures. And the cruelest part, the subject doesn't always know this. They only feel that something is missing, something they never had, something that perhaps never will come. There is a dangerous mistake, believing that a father's physical presence is enough for him to fulfill his role, that just being in the family photo, paying for school, taking the child to soccer, is enough for the child to feel guided, safe, whole. But Freudian psychoanalysis destroys this illusion. Because what creates a subject is not the father's physical presence, but his symbolic presence. It's the way he is inscribed in the child's psyche. A father can be home every day and still be a devastating absence, because the essential is not in the body, but in the place he occupies in the child's language and desire. If that father does not set limits, does not pass on values, does not show the existence of a law beyond immediate wanting, then he fails symbolically. And this failure is more lethal than pure absence, because it confuses. It creates the feeling that something is wrong without being able to name what. The child feels they should be whole, but lives broken. Feels they have a father, but doesn't feel like anyone's child. Freud teaches us that the paternal function is also the bearer of a symbolic inheritance. When a father fulfills his role, he does not just represent authority, he names the world. He presents difference, alterity, impossibility. He shows that not everything is allowed, that there are limits, that there is time, that there is another. This introduction to reality, with all its lacks, is what allows the subject to be constituted. Without it, the child grows up in a kind of psychic limbo, a space where everything is allowed, but nothing makes sense, where the mother's love suffocates and the father's absence does not organize. When the father fails this role, whether out of fear, omission, or pure ignorance, he leaves the child adrift. And the child, helpless, will seek that father anywhere. In teachers, bosses, lovers, any voice that shows firmness. But none of these figures replace the original. At best, they badly and poorly act out the lost role. Because the symbolic father is unique, he is the first to cut. And without this cut, the psyche grows crooked. Even more painful is realizing there is not always a clear culprit in this story. There are fathers who tried but didn't know how, who were raised by absent, violent, or withdrawn men and repeated what they knew. There are children who clung to idealizations, expecting from a father what he could never give. The truth, as always, is more complex than accusation, but psychoanalysis is not here to judge, it is to reveal. And what it reveals is terrifying. There are millions of subjects wandering the world with open psychic wounds, because the father who should have structured them failed at the task. Not necessarily out of malice, but out of lack of structure in himself. And the cycle repeats. The symbolic absence becomes inheritance, an invisible legacy passed from generation to generation like a silent poison. That is why understanding this distinction between the real and the symbolic is so vital. Because as long as we believe that being present is enough, we will keep raising adults broken inside, unconsciously begging for a father to authorize their existence. Freud understood that the subject only becomes such when they go through the Oedipus complex. But attention, this is not a mythological story adapted to psychology. It is a brutal, violent, necessary psychic process. The Oedipus complex is the moment when the child faces the impossibility of being everything to the mother. Until then, they believe they are the center of the world. They believe the mother's love is absolute, eternal, exclusive. And then, the father appears, not just as a figure, but as a function. He enters the scene as someone who says, "No, you can't have everything. You are not the only one." He is the one who interrupts the fusional fantasy between mother and child. And this break, as painful as it is what allows the child to become someone distinct from the mother, with their own desire, limits, and identity. But when the father is not there, or does not fulfill this role, this crossing does not happen. The child does not leave the position of being the mother's object of desire, and what seems like affection becomes a prison. The child remains there, stuck, confused between being loved and not knowing how to exist outside that love. When the Oedipus complex is not resolved, the subject grows with psychic cracks that manifest in almost imperceptible but devastating ways. Love relationships marked by extreme dependency or chronic rejection. Difficulty dealing with authority, limits, and frustration. A constant feeling of existential emptiness, as if life is never enough. This happens because the Oedipus complex is where the subject learns to renounce, to accept that they cannot have everything, that there are other desires at play, that the world does not revolve around them. Without this renunciation, the subject remains narcissistic, omnipotent, but at the same time deeply fragile. They try to control everything around them, but collapse in the face of any frustration. And this is what we see in so many adults today, men and women who emotionally are still children fighting for the mother's love because the father never came to say, enough. And the saddest part is that many don't even know this. They live with symptoms, anxiety, compulsions, depression, breakups, without ever understanding that the point of origin was a father who did not arrive in time to put them into the world. The absence of the father in the Oedipus complex does not only generate suffering, it creates a type of psychic loneliness that no one can fill, because the father is not there to compete with the mother, but to mark a necessary lack. He is the one who inscribes the child into the field of culture, language, and law. Without this, everything becomes pleasure. Pleasure of the mother who doesn't let go, of the child who doesn't release, of desire that finds no boundaries. The child sees themselves at the center of a stage they shouldn't occupy, and the worst part, they feel guilty about it. Many children become adults who carry absurd guilt, diffuse anguish, because deep down, they know they occupied a place that wasn't theirs. Freud was clear. Only those who go through the Oedipus complex become subjects, those who accept loss, submit to law, and recognize alterity. When this fails, what remains is delirium, repetition, and unnamed suffering. And the cruelest part, no one outside sees it. Only the subject knows how much it hurts to be a prisoner of a desire that was never theirs, a desire that, without a father, never learned to get lost in order to find itself. The unconscious does not remain silent. It speaks through symptoms. When the paternal function fails, whether by concrete or symbolic absence, the subject not only suffers, they repeat. Freud said that those who do not remember are condemned to repeat. And this repetition is often a disguised cry for help. The lost child tries unknowingly to reconstruct archaic situations, relive traumas, find in the present what was missing in the past. Thus, they get involved with people who abandon them, choose relationships where they feel rejected, seek partners who treat them as absent, because deep down, they are trying to reenact the original scene, the absence of the father. But unlike a theatrical play, this reenactment has no script, no applause, only pain. Pain that turns into addiction, loss of control, compulsion, drugs, sex, obsessive work, food, social media, religion. Anything can become a desperate attempt to fill the hole left by the one who was not there. But the psychic hole cannot be filled with excess. It can only be crossed, and few make that crossing. Repetition does not happen only in affects, it also infiltrates identity. Children of absent fathers often become absent fathers themselves, not out of malice, but because they never learned how to be present. Others do the opposite. They become obsessively present, trying to compensate with their own children what they never had from their fathers. But without realizing, they continue orbiting around the lack. Subjectivity gets trapped in a cycle where the desire of the other was never separated from their own. They don't know what they want, because they always wanted what they lacked. And in this labyrinth, the subject lives exhausted. They feel something sabotages them, that there is a constant noise, an unnamed anguish. They go to therapists, take medication, read self-help books, and nothing works. Because the symptom does not want to be cured, it wants to be heard. The symptom is the way the unconscious screams, "Look at me, understand me, name me." But this requires courage. Courage to return to childhood, to look into the eyes of that father, and real or symbolic, and recognize the wound he left. Because only by naming the trauma can the cycle be interrupted. And perhaps the most perverse of these symptoms is how they disguise themselves as strength. Many children of absent fathers become too independent, self-centered, invulnerable. They build an emotional armor that makes them seem untouchable. But inside, they are hungry children. They don't know how to ask for help, don't know how to trust, don't know how to relax. They live on alert, expecting the abandonment that, to them, is inevitable. Freud saw this as a narcissistic defense. If no one gave me anything, I don't need anyone. But this defense comes at a high cost. It isolates, it freezes, it hardens. The subject becomes an island, but an island surrounded by anguish on all sides. And behind this isolation is the unprocessed pain of never having been seen, loved, recognized. The body speaks, life screams, relationships collapse, and the subject continues without understanding why. Until one day, maybe, something breaks, and they realize everything they tried to build was an attempt to mend an absence that never healed. And then, if they are lucky, or heard, the reconstruction can finally begin. Loving and hating the father with the same intensity. This is more common than people think, but few admit it, because society taught that the father must be honored, respected, loved, even when he was absent, violent, cold, or neglectful. And so the child grows carrying a silent guilt, feeling anger towards someone they should love, feeling pain for someone who didn't give them love, feeling longing for something that maybe never existed. This ambivalence is not just uncomfortable, it is toxic when repressed. And this is exactly what Freud showed. The subject who does not work through this contradiction sinks into symptoms. Many children try to idealize the father, turning him into a hero, even if reality says otherwise. Others do the opposite, demonize, deny, exclude. But in both cases, the father remains there, inside, structuring desires, fears, choices, because you don't erase a psychic figure simply by distance. Physical absence is not the same as symbolic expulsion, and it is this difference that makes everything more complicated and more painful. Ambivalence toward the father also transfers to other relationships. Children who hated their father but secretly loved him tend to seek the same pattern in partners. They go after men or women who are absent, who don't look, who reject, and there, unknowingly, they relive the original pain. They want to be seen, but choose those who don't see. And the cycle feeds itself. The more the other rejects, the more the subject desires. The more they get hurt, the more they cling. Because there is an unconscious hope. This time it will be different. But it never is. Freud called this the compulsion to repeat, an unconscious attempt to rewrite the story with a happy ending. But the outcome is almost always the same, and the ambivalence remains. The child hates the father for being absent, but hates themselves even more for still wanting his presence. And this internal conflict corrodes. It generates anxiety, instability, existential crises. Because the subject is trapped between two affective poles, and neither offers peace. The way out of this deadlock is not easy. It is not enough to cut the father out of life, nor to pretend everything is fine. Psychoanalysis points to another path, that of elaboration. Recognizing that yes, one loves but also hates, that there were moments of tenderness, but also abandonment, that the father may have tried and still failed. It is in this recognition of complexity that healing begins, when the subject stops seeking an ideal father and starts dealing with the real father, with all his lacks, limits, and miseries. It is not about forgiving in a moral sense, but elaborating in a psychic sense, giving an internal place to this figure so he stops haunting. So the subject can finally desire without repeating, love without punishing themselves, build without destroying. Because as long as the father remains an idealized ghost or a hated demon, the child will remain a prisoner. And no one lives well while trying to prove something to a father who doesn't listen, or who never knew how to listen. There comes a time when looking back no longer helps. The father didn't come, or came wrong, or arrived too late. The scream has already gone out, the wound has already formed, and the echo of that absence has taken over the inner house. And that's when many give up, on loving, trusting, building. But psychoanalysis shows another path, a more difficult crossing, but deeply transformative, becoming the father of oneself. Not in the sense of hardening, of saying, I don't need anyone, but in the most radical sense of the word, being the structure that was missing, being the voice that guides, being the limit that organizes. When the father fails, the subject needs to create inside what they didn't receive from outside. And this is not selfishness nor vanity. It is survival. It is emotional autonomy built with the trembling hands of someone who was once an abandoned child, assuming this internal role demands facing the abyss. It means looking at the father, ain't real or symbolic, and admitting, you were missing for me. But not stopping there. It means using that lack as raw material for a new foundation. Starting to listen to oneself, protect oneself, experience frustration in a healthy way. It means cutting symbiotic ties, recognizing limits, and desiring consciously. The subject who becomes father of themselves no longer lives trying to prove something to the world. They already know who they are, what they want, and what they no longer accept. And this gesture, intimate, silent, almost sacred, is perhaps the most revolutionary of all. Because it breaks the cycle. It interrupts generations of absence. It creates a new lineage. Those who, even wounded, choose to care, and not just for others, but for themselves. Because there is no greater freedom than no longer depending on a dead, absent, or idealized father to finally exist. And maybe now only one question remains. What have you done, or are still doing, with the absence that shaped you? Because the father's silence, as devastating as it is, does not have to be the final word. There is a scream inside you that can still turn into language, into gesture, into name. And maybe if this text touched you, that scream has already started to move. So if you can, share. Not out of vanity, but so this conversation continues. Subscribe here so you don't walk alone in this crossing. And if you want, leave in the comments your story, your pain, your overcoming, or even what you still lack. Sometimes what you carry can be exactly what someone else needed to hear. This is how new fathers are born, not by blood but by word, and this is how lost children finally find themselves.